I'm Greg Greenwood and welcome back to my studio. This video is part 4 of my fold forming series. I call it Cuffs and Bracelets. I've chosen cuffs for our subject because fold forming cuffs is spontaneous and bold, but challenging. Making cuffs gives you plenty of room for experimenting. Once you understand how the fold forming processes work and you become comfortable with fold forming, you can reduce the scale of your projects and integrate fold forming into your designs. Plus, cuffs are fun. Let's take a look at cuff and bracelet examples using line, T, wedge, multiple, leaf, and boat folds. These are the techniques that you learned in parts 1, 2, and 3. Take a look at these 3 videos if you haven't already. This video will make more sense to you if you do. Due to time and material constraints, some examples are not full cuffs but demonstrate how the techniques can look. We'll start off simple with a single line fold. The metal's been folded, the single line fold's been hammered into it, it's been opened up and wrapped around the bracelet mandrel. Real straightforward design, single line fold. The single line fold you'll recognize as one that has been hammered and drawn around into the circle. You can see the distinctive forging hammer marks on the metal. This cuff has used a series of single line folds going across the metal and using that positive and negative, bending it one way and then bending it back the other, and then opened on up and wrapped around the bracelet mandrel into a cuff shape. You will notice that the edges have been folded back on themselves, a real organic look here, and these were just bent back with flat nose pliers. This cuff has a double line fold that has been textured, and then the metal has been wrapped around the bracelet mandrel. Real straightforward, but real interesting look here with that double line fold and that kind of mysterious crack down the middle of the cuff. This cuff has a double line fold that has been hammered on that fold edge to make the curvature of the cuff. When you are making your cuffs, there is an important design and practical element to keep in mind. Raw edges. Fold forming can be notorious for raw and sharp edges. How do we solve this problem and make them safe edges? 1. Fold over the edges, planish them flat or leave them rounded and smooth. 2. We can roll the edges with or without wire. 3. Hidden edges. This can be interesting and fun. And 4. Something new, a different twist on fold forming. Tube folds. This double line fold has been squeezed nice and tight in the middle, and you'll notice that the edges have been folded over. These edges were folded over prior to the metal being bent into the cuff shape. They were not hammered down, they were left kind of open, and then when you take the metal and bend it around the bracelet mandrel, it will fold down nice and tight, but still leave kind of a nice soft edge instead of a hammered, planished, sharp edge. This cuff has the double line fold running down the middle and has been textured, but notice the edges on this one. The edges have been scalloped prior to the cuff being bent around the mandrel and then folded back onto itself and then planished a little bit tighter. The edges are tighter and sharper than the prior cuff that we just looked at, but it makes a nice smooth edge so it won't hurt the person who's wearing the cuff. Any kind of a design can be done with this technique. This is simply scallops. It can be any type of leaf design, you name it, it can be done. And it really adds a nice interest to the cuff. This cuff has the double line folds running perpendicular to the length of the cuff. They were put in, textured, and then prior to bending it around the mandrel, the edges have been curved over on themselves. Instead of coming to the outside, they go to the inside. So this leaves a little bit different look on the edge. And then that folded edge has been textured too. So don't be afraid to add a little texture to that folded edge. Gives a real nice interest to your cuffs. This cuff has a double line fold running down the entire length of the cuff, and it's been opened and then pinched shut to give kind of an undulating look. Then running perpendicular to those, wedge double line folds have been introduced to give it kind of a nice contrasty look. You'll notice that the edge still is a raw edge, but at the ends of the cuff, they have been folded over to give it a little bit more of a safe edge. The soft triple line fold can be a real nice, simple, elegant designed feature. This cuff has the triple line fold running down the middle of the design, and it has been squeezed nice and tight. And then notice the edges have been folded over on themselves, and this is a soft fold, has not been planished real hard along the outside edges, which gives it that real nice soft look. Look at the back and the end of the cuff. It's simply been squeezed tight, which gives it a real nice flow to the end of the cuff. This triple line fold has used the technique of forging on that line fold to bring the metal around into the cuff shape. This triple line fold has been textured and hammered down to give it a little bit more organic look. And then the rest of the cuff has been textured with a chasing hammer. On this one, you'll notice that the edges have been folded in. But I want to show you the very end of this particular cuff to see how this folded edge was done. You can see that the whole cuff, after the triple line fold was put into the metal, that the metal was folded all the way back onto itself and into that triple line fold. That buries the raw edge into that fold and makes the entire inside of the cuff nice and smooth. T-folds can lend themselves to cuffs very, very nicely. Here's a kind of a tapered T-fold wrapping around the entire cuff, and notice the edges have been folded down and planished to make a nice extra line design on the cuff. This cuff has a T-fold running the length of the cuff and then has single line folds running perpendicular to the T-fold. This cuff has a T-fold running down the middle of the cuff and then has been twisted and folded over in opposite directions. The edges of the cuff have been crimped, and this will soften the raw edges just a little bit. It's still a little bit sharp, but it does soften the edges somewhat. This cuff was made by having the entire sheet crisscrossed with single line folds. Then it was folded in the middle to make the T-fold, and then spread out and wrapped around the mandrel. Then it was hammered down with the rawhide mallet, and the edges were crimped and folded back onto themselves, and then tapped down with a rawhide mallet. This is a T-fold that has been twisted and spiraled around itself, and then laid flat, and then hammered with the rawhide mallet to make it more flat, and then wrapped around the bracelet mandrel. This is a wedge T-fold that tapers on all the way around the other side of the cuff. We'll take a look at that side too. Kind of a neat twist at the very end of that wedge T-fold. This is a back-to-back wedge T-fold, and using kind of an organic look to it with folded edges. And then you'll notice on the right there is some scored lines into that wedge T-fold to give it a little extra texture. Those scored lines were put in with the binding wire and hammering. Wedge T-folds used with double line fold on this one. This cuff has 4 boat folds in it, 2 side by side, and then the 2 side by sides put back to back on the cuff. A little bit of texture's been put on there, and then the lines of the bolt folds have been planished down and then wrapped around the mandrel. This cuff is actually a combination of a boat fold and the leaf fold. The boat fold was put into the metal first, and then the leg edges or the open edges were forged, and that brought the cuff around. And you'll notice that on the ends of the cuff, that's where the leaves are a little bit wider, and then they taper down much more thinner toward the top or the middle of the cuff. This cuff was made the same way as the prior cuff. The difference between this one and the last cuff is that the wider part of the leaf is in the middle of the cuff and then tapers down to the end of the cuff. Let's take a look at the back of this one so you can see how that boat fold really makes a nice, clean, comfortable, safe edge for this cuff. Here's the inside of that cuff showing the bolt fold. You can see that the nice edges of that bolt fold really make good, safe edges for the wearer. Here's a cuff using the multiple pleated fold. As you can see on the top edge, there's something a little bit funny there. The fold has been folded back on itself, but there's a little copper wire running through that. That's one way that you can finish off an edge, by folding in a copper wire. Here's another example of how you can use a copper wire and have the edges folded around on that copper wire and add a little extra decorative design. Here's the other side of that cuff, and you can see that this edge has just been folded back on itself. So you can mix and match different edges on your same design. Here's a multiple pleated fold with some added texture and some nice crisp line folds in it. A little bit further round on the cuff. How it tapers in at the other end of the cuff is kind of interesting. An interesting way of not having any raw edges is to start with no raw edges. You can use a tube, which obviously has no raw edges on it except for the ends. Let's take this tube and we'll make a few folds on it, and I'll show you what I mean. I've taken the tube and flattened it in my flat jawed vise, and then let's put it in our vise. Now this looks real familiar to you because it looks exactly like what we would do with a double line fold, triple line fold, any of those folds. We have a chuck tip in the vise. So let's just take it and we'll put a T-fold on this side. Now we have our T-fold on this side. We'll take it out of the vise, and you can see that this edge right here is a built-in safety edge. No matter what we do to this other side, it's going to be nice and safe for a wearer, if it's for a cuff or any other piece of jewelry. Let's put a bolt fold in this side just for fun, and we can take a look at it. So there we have our tube folds and all safety edges. There's no sharp or raw edges at all. No matter what we do with this, if we bend it around for a cuff or integrate it into a piece of jewelry, there are no raw edges. Here's a double line fold that has been fold formed with the tubing. You can see it automatically builds in a nice safe edge, gets rid of that raw edge on the inside of the cuff, simply because it's tubing and there's no raw edges. This tube fold was done with a wedged T-fold and a boat fold. The boat fold was put into the tubing first, and then the wedge T-fold was put in. Here's the tube fold with the boat fold on the inside and the two wedge folds back to back on the outside. Again, you can see that there's no raw edges there, and the ends of the cuff, of course, are raw, but those have been filed and are nice and smooth. Fold forming. What a fascinating technique that can give your jewelry projects a whole new dimension. Watch for my other videos in the fold forming series: rolling mill, putting on the squeeze, and air chasing. Please subscribe and ring the bell. I'm Greg Greenwood. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.